Hello, this is Pastor Will, and I decided to put together a short little video on a concept that people may wonder at. It's the weeks of years. Where do we get the idea of a 7-year week over a 7-day week? Now, this has to do with Bible prophecy, and as we read out of Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through 27, we find that there's a group of 70 weeks there in that book, and this is a key point in Bible prophecy because it identifies the 70th week as the 7-year tribulation. And so it looks there, I'm going to read that. It's in verse 24 through 27. 70 weeks are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, and to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, to anoint the most holy place. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild, to rebuild Jerusalem, to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in troubled time. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, to the end thereof shall be war, desolations are decreed, and he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So you can see there's lots of weeks here. 70 weeks, and basically this is given to the Jewish people, to Daniel and the Jewish people, to set up and establish their Messiah. So by the end of the 70 weeks, they will have the Messiah, will be ruling from Jerusalem, from his throne there in Jerusalem. 70 weeks, and then there's a decree by King Cyrus, who made the decree, and then from that time, there's 70 weeks. Now we know this isn't 70 weeks of days, but 70 weeks of years. So we know that because about that time, from when Cyrus makes that decree until the time when that the anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing, that's from the time that will be about 69 weeks, and there's a remaining week there, the 70th week, which is where we get the 7-year tribulation, and that strong covenant is made with many for 1 week. That's by the Antichrist. Half of the week, he'll put an end to the sacrifice and offering that's at the temple at the time, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is where we get the weeks. And when I would read that, I'm like, okay, what basis do we have for saying that the weeks are not weeks of days, but yet they're weeks of years? And so as a person now, I used to read this, I wanted to know what the basis of this was. And I found out through my study that this isn't some obscure thing. This actually was front and center in Jewish life, the idea of having weeks of years, not just weeks of days. So I'm going to show you that. You see that in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 through 7. There's a concept called the Sabbath year. And usually we think of the Sabbath day. On the seventh day, people would work 6 days, and on the seventh day they would rest with the Sabbath day. But we see the Sabbath year being implemented in Leviticus 25, verses 1 through 7. It says, the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyards and gather its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap what grows of itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land. The Sabbath of the land shall provide food for you, yourself, your male, female slaves, and for your hired worker, and the sojourner who lives with you, and for your cattle and for the wild animals that are in your land. All its yield shall be your food." Okay, so there's not going to be any work being done on the land in the 7th year. 6 years they'll work, and then they'll store up what they can for the 7th year, and they will just live off of that in the 7th year. So they're not going to work for that year. Now, I'm sure they'll be active doing other things, but the land's going to get rest. The animals are going to get rest. And so this is a Sabbath year. Can you imagine that? Having a Sabbath year now, right? Okay, so we see this continued, and this is where we're going to start seeing the word week being used as year in Leviticus 25, verse 8 through 12. It says, you shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the time of the 7 weeks of years shall give you 49 years. Then you shall sound the loud trumpet on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement you shall sound the trumpet throughout all your land, and you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, when each of you shall return to his property, and each of you shall return to his clan. That 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. In it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of itself, nor gather the grapes from the undressed vine. For it is a jubilee, it shall be holy to you. You may eat the produce of the field. Okay, so not only did they have a Sabbath year, but they had every 7 Sabbath years, they had an extra Sabbath year, which called the year of Jubilee. So they had 49 years. It would be 7 Sabbath years, and that the 49th year would be the 7th Sabbath year. They would have that Sabbath year, and then they would tag on an extra one called the year of Jubilee, which would be year 50. So actually, they would have 2 years in a row, 49 and 50, where they would have Sabbath years. And in that year 50, all the slaves would be set free, or lands, debts will be forgiven, all that kind of stuff. It's a really interesting thing. So you see it, they don't have a Sabbath year, but they have a Sabbath of Sabbath years. You see, so it's very much in the mindset of the Jewish people that they would have these weeks. And so when you hear from 70 weeks from Daniel, this is a common concept for him. He understood this. Now, the Babylonians would not, because this wasn't their culture, but this was Daniel's culture. All right. Now you may be wondering about, what do they do? How do they do this in the Sabbath year, and then how do they eat through that time? Well, God works with them supernaturally. And I want to just point this out. Leviticus 25, verse 20 through 22, it says, and if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, if we may not sow or gather in our crop? And God speaking, I will command my blessing on you in the 6th year, so that it will produce a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will be eating some of the old crop. You shall eat the old until the 9th year, when its crop arrives. So God's going to make sure that they'll get plenty in the 6th year, where they can stockpile enough to where the new crop starts kicking in, and they can start in the process again. Kind of like Joseph. They had 7 bad years and 7 good years. And in the good years, they were supposed to store up and prepare for the 7 bad years. And they did. And they established grain bins and storages and stuff like that. So anyway, that's how we get the idea of the weeks of years. We get the 7-year week. So 490 years, and there's a remaining 7-year period, and that is what is called the 7-year tribulation.